This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Check out Squarespace through the link in the description below. More on them in a bit. Cold War historical enthusiasts and disaster preppers are often fascinated by the idea of the continuation of government. If Europe, the US, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, or any other nuclear power found themselves suddenly locked in the nightmare scenario, where would the president or the prime minister be whisked away to? It's a sad but necessary facet of life in the nuclear age, and during the Cold War, governments developed all sorts of contingencies. We've even talked about some of them on this channel. In the 1950s, not too long after plans for the US president had been secured, a secret government plan targeted the logical next level of government continuation. Where can we stash 500 and some odd members of Congress? This couldn't simply be a small bunker for one man, his wife, and children, and a few advisors. This would need to be a huge area with living quarters, kitchens, latrines, and other legislative needs. As the Americans began vetting locations, they honed in on a particularly sitcom-esque idea. In the event of a nuclear war, they would secretly locate all living members of Congress to a nearby resort in rural West Virginia and just hope that no one noticed. This is the story of Project Greek Islands, the underground congressional bunker at the Greenbrier Hotel. The current iteration of the Greenbrier was founded in the early 1900s, but the land on which it sits has been used as some form of resort for much, much longer. Many decades before modern buildings and golf courses rose up around the property, there was no Greenbrier resort. Instead, there was a simple hot spring and an accompanying spring house, a basic structure that kept leaves, dirt, and animals out of the water. For centuries, indigenous peoples in the Virginia area had adopted the practice of taking the waters, using this particular hot spring as a natural way of alleviating certain illnesses or chronic conditions. In 1778, during the American Revolution, a Virginia pioneer known only as Mrs. Anderson adopted the native tradition, seeking to use the spring water to allay her rheumatism. Thousands more Americans followed her lead over the years, and the destination, as well as the town that sprung up around it, became known as White Sulphur Springs. It was especially popular as a summer destination for coastal Virginians who could escape the swampy heat of eastern Virginia and find refuge in the mountains. There were a number of changes over the first 100 years. The property was purchased by a wealthy Baltimore family called the Caldwells in the early 19th century, who began to add structures to the grounds, shaping it into a more modern retreat destination. The resort grew in popularity very quickly after that, attracting a number of high-profile politicians and businessmen. To date, 26 US presidents have stayed at the Greenbrier. Major renovations were undertaken by the Caldwells in 1858. Only a few summers later, the resort's very existence was threatened by the American Civil War, which was heavily centered around conflict in Virginia. The town of White Sulphur Springs, as well as its popular resort destination, changed hands between the Union and Confederate sides, most prominently during the Shenandoah Valley Campaign, when the Union Army nearly burnt it to the ground. The American Civil War was an important time for the Greenbrier precursor resort, and not just because of the armed conflict going on around it. The state of Virginia itself was horribly divided on both past and present issues, and the divides ran right through the town of White Sulphur Springs. The western section of Virginia had pockets of residents who wanted to form their own state for some time. The mountain chains in the western portion of Virginia were so impassable during the 18th and 19th centuries that many western Virginians felt that they were an entirely different state. The economy was less diversified, and the population much more closely resembled Pennsylvania or Ohio, with Germans and Protestant Scotch-Irish settlers dominating the population. So on August 6, 1861, after Virginia had already seceded from the US and joined the Confederacy, 39 northwestern counties ceded from Virginia and formed their own state. They referred to themselves as the Restored Government of Virginia, but when they realized they would need a new name, they decided they would call themselves West Sylvania. Yep, seriously, before they eventually settled on West Virginia, the restored government of Virginia wanted to name itself West Sylvania. Greenbrier County, where the White Sulphur Springs is located, is right on the border between modern-day Virginia and West Virginia. In the 1860s, the county was not part of the initial group that voted to secede from Virginia and form its own state, but it eventually voted to join West Virginia in a second wave of county referendums. Thus, the resort gained a new 19th century charm. After the Civil War, it enjoyed a unique status as a border location between Old Virginia and New, between Union and Confederacy. Confederate General Robert E. Lee rarely spoke publicly after the war, but he did advocate for Southerners and Northerners to come together and heal their differences, specifically at the Greenbrier County Hot Spring. He primarily did this in a political paper he published called White Sulphur Manifesto. Traffic dramatically increased after 1869 when a railroad line was extended right to the gates of the resort property. White Sulphur Springs flourished as a resort town for decades, so much so that in 1910 the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway Company saw the Corwell's resort property as a strong investment option. They purchased the property and buildings that had been built up over the hot spring over the previous 132 years, making massive changes of their own. They hired Frederick Sterner, an architect who gained modest fame for his work in New York City and Colorado, to design a massive, ornate 6-story hotel that would be the centerpiece of the property. The ownership group also decided it was time to give the resort its own name, which they pulled from the surrounding county in West Virginia, Greenbrier. Now, just before we get into the rest of the history today, let me take a quick moment to tell you about today's fantastic sponsor, Squarespace. Now, two simple things. Maybe you've got an idea for a website or a business or a podcast that you want to start knocking around in your brain. Well, two, the only way to figure out whether that's a good idea is to get it out there to the world, and they will tell you. And that can be daunting, of course, because it's scary to pursue new things, but not knowing how to set up a website should not be an excuse. There are no excuses available with Squarespace. Squarespace allows you to create a powerful website for whatever you're up to. You want to sell something online? Yes, easy to set up a store with Squarespace. You want to do a podcast? Sure, they can handle that too. It all starts on Squarespace with a beautiful template that you can customize to your heart's content, or you can start from scratch, or you can move over an existing domain, making everything super easy to manage. But, if I were you, I wouldn't start from scratch. The templates look amazing and they are easy to customize. And once you've gone through that easy customization process, no updates, no patches, no tech nonsense to deal with. No one likes that. Also, Squarespace handle all the website-y stuff. I said they do podcasts, but they also do mailing lists and social integrations and just everything else that you could need. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/geographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And let's get back to it. By the 1950s, the ever-expanding Cold War dictated much of the United States defense budget. The US was dumping billions of dollars in manpower and resources into devising safety contingencies, retaliatory strike models, and plans for the continuance of government in the event of a nuclear war. Some of these plans are well known, partially because of their presence in popular media. For example, the nuclear football, which is a black briefcase with nuclear access codes that follows the US president wherever he goes. This has been a major plot point in Mission Impossible, The Fast and the Furious, and the TV series 24. However, most of the projects are either not well known publicly or may even still be classified. There are specific rally points, like the Raven Rock facility in Pennsylvania, which has seen its usage rate scaled up and down at various points over the last 75 years, most recently after 9/11. The US even has concrete nuclear war ties to its interstate system, thanks to the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. In the mid-1950s, while President Eisenhower was preparing to deal with escalating tensions between China and Taiwan, he was concerned that the American road structure was woefully inadequate in the event of some sort of domestic conflict or event. His reticence paved the way for an expanded interstate highway system, which had obvious commercial benefits, but would also expedite the process of civilians leaving the cities in the event of a major attack. This was the America that served as a setting for Project Greek Island. As relations with Russia and China hit a deep freeze and Cuba fell to communism, it became increasingly imperative to find a place to stash the US Congress in the event of a nuclear war. So in 1955, the Army Corps of Engineers began scouting mid-Atlantic locations that 500 members of Congress could reasonably be located to on short notice. They eventually selected the Greenbrier Resort, just over the border into West Virginia. White Sulphur Springs was close enough that it was a relatively short drive, but definitely far enough away that it would be an unlikely target in the event of a nuclear strike. Once the Greenbrier was selected as the final choice, the Eisenhower administration approached the Greenbrier management with a contract proposal. The US government already held conferences conferences there, so there was already an established relationship between owner and some US liaisons. Both parties came to an agreement, and thus in 1957 construction began for this rather uncreatively titled project, Project X. The $14 million bunker was designed to be a two-story facility 720 feet below the grounds of the Greenbrier. In total, the bunkers comprised more than 110,000 square feet. There were 18 dormitory-style rooms, each of which slept 60 people, a large cafeteria area that could seat 400 people at a time, and the adjacent kitchen had food that was regularly refreshed for decades. At any point, the bunker had enough food to feed 1,000 people for 60 days. There were 4 different entrances and exits to the bunker, and each was sealed by a massive metal door made by the Mosler Safe Company in Ohio. Each door was shipped directly to the Greenbrier by railway. The largest of the 4 doors weighed 28 tons. The bunker wouldn't be able to withstand a direct nuclear strike, but the likelihood of a direct nuclear strike in rural West Virginia was deemed to be extremely unlikely. Beyond the living quarters and other necessary bits, the bunker contained some very interesting rooms. There was a congressional records room, which isn't exactly what it sounds like. Yes, it holds records, but it also serves as a modest armory, with rifles, batons, pistols, and whatever else was deemed a weapon that could prove useful after a nuclear strike. There was also a furnace, or pathological waste incinerator, that was designed to dispose of human remains. A macabre but ultimately thoughtful inclusion, were the US legislative body to be actually stuck underground for many years. There was even a small prison with a collection of straitjackets, should any members of Congress begin to lose their minds under the stress of a nuclear conflict. Oh, and let's not forget the telecommunications facility. The designers of the Greenbrier bunker had absolutely no idea what sort of nuclear conflict they were preparing for. It could be a total worldwide disaster, or perhaps most of the US coastal cities had been decimated. Or maybe the Soviets only elected to bomb Wyoming and Montana. Whatever the details, in any scenario where Congress still had a large country to continuously govern, it would still need some sort of communications relay to broadcast on TV and radio to the outside world. The room included a convincing backdrop of the US Capitol building in Washington, D.C., hoping to offer some illusion of a geonormalized congressional session, perhaps to fool attackers, but maybe just for the sake of comforting fellow Americans. Perhaps the most interesting part of Project X was that it expanded well beyond the boundaries of the underground bunker. The plan called for the construction of a large forum room inside the Greenbrier itself. The room would need to be huge because it was designed as a potential location for joint sessions of Congress, but such a large room would be impractical to build underground. Thus, part of the new construction of Project X called for the construction of 3 large above-ground halls to be built as part of the Greenbrier itself. The monstrously large exhibit hall was designed for the entire congressional body, while the adjacent 440-seat Governor's Hall was intended for the House of Representatives, and the 130-seat Mountaineer Room was intended for the Senate. In the event of an attack, these facilities would be locked down along with the underground bunker. However, during normal Greenbrier operation, guests could access these rooms just as they might any other part of the resort. A marketing brochure from the 1960s actively brags about the majestic exhibit hall. The floor is finished with a beautiful plastic terrazzo designed to support unlimited weight. All in all, the creation of the bunker took about 5 years. It was finished on October 16, 1962, and it very nearly got immediate use. That same month, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred. After it was completed, someone with a liberal arts degree finally got a hold of the project nomenclature and gave it a more fitting title: Project Casper. Project Casper was a massive undertaking, as the US government installed a massive bunker underneath a popular, fully functional resort and hotel. In order to preserve the air of secrecy, the Greenbrier and the US government timed the construction to happen alongside another big undertaking. The Greenbrier was adding a new wing onto its hotel called the West Virginia Wing, and the government used the spectacle of the hotel's own construction project to secretly bring in materials and build all the necessary structures. The concurrent timing was a good enough plan to fool most people, but not quite everyone. Many of the contractors and locals who were working on the massive construction project raised their eyebrows pretty quickly. Construction worker Randy Wickline witnessed armed guards posted at the construction site and observed more than 50,000 tons of poured concrete. He summed it up nicely in an interview decades later. Nobody came out and said it was a bomb shelter, but you could pretty well look and see the way they were setting it up that they wasn't building it to keep the rain off them. I mean, a fool would have known. Truman Wright, the longtime manager of the Greenbrier in the 50s and 60s, recalled a similar story. A contractor who helped build the exhibit hall once asked him, "This is an exhibit hall? We've got 110 urinals we just installed. what the hell are you going to exhibit? After its completion in 1962, the Greenbrier bunker was quietly maintained for decades, all the way through the end of the Cold War. There were about a dozen permanent government employees who were tasked with essential upkeep duties. Their secret cover was to work as members of a TV repair company called Forsyth Associates, located right outside of Washington. To maintain their cover, they really did do TV repair work for residents who stayed at the Greenbrier, but they spent most of their time in the bunker, refreshing the pantry, replacing air filters, and even updating prescription drug profiles. You see, each bunk was assigned to a specific member of Congress, and if any individual representative or senator required any medication, there was always an extra reserve of it at the Greenbrier in the event of an attack that carried no advanced warning. The bunker really was ready for anything. As the Cold War wound down, the bunker's name changed again to the name it is perhaps best known by, Operation Greek Island. That was its name when the Berlin Wall fell and when the Soviet Union dissolved. That was also its name in 1992 when reporter Ted Gupp revealed the existence of the Greenbrier bunker in a meaty expose in a Sunday edition of the Washington Post. That was May the 31st, 1992. Just days later, the bunker was officially decommissioned. The strength of the bunker was the secrecy that it maintained for 30 years during the height of the Cold War. With its cover blown, its value as a defense asset for Congress was all but erased. Following the closure of Project Greek Island, the Greenbrier fell on tough times. The resort filed for bankruptcy in 2009 with a massive debt sheet and declining traffic. West Virginia's remoteness is often an asset for its tourism sector, but in the case of the Greenbrier, there was too much competition from resorts that were more easily accessible. Fortunately, the Greenbrier wasn't liquidated. It was purchased by local entrepreneur Jim Justice for $20 million. In the 10 years since, the Greenbrier has once again become a worthwhile venue with a massive variety of unique attractions. For one thing, the Greenbrier is returning to its one-time reputation as a popular international destination for sports. It is, first and foremost, a popular destination for both amateur and professional golfers. It birthed the modern-day Ryder Cup format in 1979 and has since become a regular destination on the PGA Tour. Tom Watson is the resort's golf pro emeritus, a job he inherited from Sam Snead. It's also a destination for professional tennis. Its mix of indoor and outdoor hardcourts enticed the World Team Tennis League to move its entire 2020 season to the Greenbrier because of the impact of COVID-19. Even American football has come to town, though West Virginia has no major professional sports franchises. The Greenbrier has become a trendy destination for NFL teams to hold their summer camp, starting with the New Orleans Saints in 2014. The Greenbrier maintains lots of other interesting tourist attractions, including a falconry program and a 2-story presidential cottage museum. But objectively, its most compelling attraction has to be the congressional bunker, of course. In 1995, 3 years after the Washington Post ousted its existence, the Greenbrier opens the bunker for tours. Guests can enter the space and view any of the declassified portions of the facility. Since its reopening, it's even become possible to rent out individual sections of the bunker, a memorable setting for board meetings, family reunions, or even wedding receptions. If only comedian Norm Macdonald had opted for a tour of the Greenbrier sometime between 1995 and his appearance on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in November of 2000, and he might have walked away with $1 million. Regis Philbin, may he rest in peace. Perhaps he was part of the Illuminati that knows where the current congressional nuclear bunker is, but until another intrepid reporter goes asking around, it's unlikely we'll know where the next fallout contingency is. We only know that the last one was wild and wonderful. 700 feet under a golf course with vacationers and professional athletes just a few dozen meters away. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, please do check out our fantastic sponsor Squarespace, link to them below, and thank you for watching.